She had everything the system promised would protect her. A master's degree in child psychology, 15 years of teaching experience, a spotless employment record, an updated driver's license, current vehicle insurance, signed permission slips from every parent, emergency contact information for each of her 24 students, a detailed lesson plan for the field trip, a first aid kit in the bus, a charged cell phone in her pocket. Everything. What she didn't have was the luxury of being left alone. On Thursday, April 18th, 2024, at 1:47 in the afternoon, one decision by one officer would change everything for everyone on that yellow school bus. It would go viral within hours. It would expose a pattern of corruption that reached far beyond one man with a badge. It would cost a police officer his career and his freedom. It would traumatize 24 children in ways they would process for years to come. And it would spark a movement that would ripple across the entire country, forcing communities to reckon with uncomfortable truths about who gets protected and who gets pursued. But first, Diana Foster had to survive it. The morning had been perfect. The kind of morning that made Diana remember exactly why she loved teaching. She had arrived at Riverside Elementary at 6:45 a.m., while the sky was still the pale gray of early spring dawn. The yellow school bus was already in the parking lot, engine off, waiting like a patient animal. She did a comprehensive walk-through of the vehicle with Marcus Crawford, the bus driver she had worked with for 6 years. They checked the seats for any hazards. They tested the wheelchair lift even though they didn't have any students with mobility needs today. They verified the emergency procedures that Marcus had been flawlessly executing for 8 years, and they reviewed the route one final time. Diana was 38 years old, and she moved through the world with careful precision. Safety wasn't an accident. It was intention. It was preparation. It was the accumulated weight of 1,000 small decisions made in favor of protection. Safety was love, she believed. Safety was how you told people they mattered. She was Black. She had a master's degree in child psychology. She had built a career on being good at what she did, on being better than necessary, on being so competent that no one could dismiss her or her work. This had worked well for her most of the time. It had given her a job she loved. It had given her a reputation in the community as someone who could be trusted with the most precious things parents had, their children. It had given her students who felt not just educated, but genuinely safe in her presence. What it hadn't given her was immunity. What credentials and degrees and years of perfect service had not given her was protection from the arbitrary exercise of power. By 7:45 a.m., the students began arriving in a steady stream. Third graders and second graders, ages 7 to 9, dressed in casual clothes their parents had deemed appropriate for a field trip. Marcus was there, and Aisha and Jerome and Amara and all the others. Diana counted them as they boarded, checking off names on her clipboard with the concentration of someone managing a complex operation. She watched each child find a seat and fasten their seatbelt. She mentally noted which children might get carsick on longer drives and would need the trash bag she had brought. Which ones would need extra attention during educational portions of the trip. Which ones had anxiety that required reassurance and specific coping strategies. This was teaching. This was the thing that no one who hadn't done it could understand. It wasn't just delivering lesson plans. It was keeping people safe. It was knowing each child well enough to predict their needs before they could articulate them. It was maintaining constant awareness of 30 separate human beings while also managing logistics and time and curriculum and the emotional tone of the entire group. By 8:15 a.m., all 24 students were seated. Diana moved down the aisle one final time, checking seatbelts with methodical care. She paused at each student, making eye contact, ensuring they were secure. Everyone secure. 24 heads nodded a chorus of confirmation. Excellent. We're going to Riverside Nature Preserve today. We're going to study the ecosystem. We're going to be real ecologists. Scientists who study how the environment works and how different plants and animals survive in different conditions. We're going to learn, we're going to be safe, and we're going to have a good day. The children settled into their seats with comfortable anticipation, a group that trusted their leader. Marcus started the engine. The bus moved smoothly out of the parking lot and onto the main road that would eventually lead them to Route 9, the highway that connected the city to the rural preserve 30 miles away. Diana began the first activity. It was a counting game designed to engage young minds and keep them focused outward toward educational content, rather than inward toward boredom or behavioral problems. She had used this exact activity hundreds of times. She knew precisely how to modulate her voice, when to pause, how to maintain engagement without creating artificial excitement. "I'm going to call out a number," she explained, speaking clearly so that all children could hear her over the engine noise. "And you're going to count how many trees you see before we reach the next stretch of road. You'll be looking for different types of trees: oak, maple, pine. Really observe them." "Ready, ready." The children's voices overlapped with each other, full of genuine excitement. 47 trees. Go." The children turned their faces toward the windows. They began counting. They began calling out numbers. The bus filled with the sound of learning, the sound of young minds engaged in meaningful work, the sound of safety and community. Diana sat in her designated seat behind Marcus Crawford and let herself feel the deep satisfaction of a plan executing perfectly. Permission slips checked and accounted for, documentation complete and organized, route confirmed with transportation supervisor checked, emergency procedures reviewed with bus driver checked, students engaged and calm absolutely checked. She had a medication list for students with allergies, a communication protocol if anyone got injured, a backup plan if the bus broke down. Everything was in order. Everything was precisely as it should be. Everything reflected her commitment to these children. 30 minutes into the drive at mile marker 47 on Route 9, Diana noticed something shift in the landscape of her awareness. There was a patrol car, 3 vehicles behind them. It wasn't particularly unusual to see police on the highway. Route 9 was a major thoroughfare connecting the city to the rural areas. Traffic enforcement was a standard part of highway safety, but this car wasn't passing. It wasn't positioning itself for radar enforcement. It wasn't doing anything that would constitute normal patrol behavior. It was simply maintaining distance, staying behind them, watching. Diana's body recognized the pattern before her conscious mind finished processing it. Her hands gripped the metal railing a little tighter. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her breathing remained the same, but her awareness expanded beyond the immediate interior of the bus to encompass threat detection, threat assessment, threat response protocols. She had learned over the course of her 38 years of being a black woman in America to recognize this particular dynamic. Not casual observation, not routine enforcement. Targeted attention. The children were still counting trees, still engaged in the lesson, still unaware that their safe world had suddenly shifted. Good. The last thing they needed was to absorb her anxiety. Children could read adults like adults read books. They could sense subtle shifts in mood and energy. Diana had trained herself rigorously not to let her nervousness bleed into her teaching voice. She checked the mirror mounted on the back of the seat in front of her. The patrol car was still there, maintaining its distance. She counted the vehicles between them. 2. That was the standard distance for a traffic stop if one was coming. But the bus hadn't been speeding. It was traveling exactly 55 miles per hour in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. The bus hadn't violated any traffic laws that she could discern. She had reviewed the route specifically before the trip, verifying that there were no construction zones or road closures. This stretch of Route 9 was standard for school buses. Hundreds of them used this route annually. The insurance was current. The vehicle registration was up to date. Every piece of documentation was complete and correct. She had done everything right, but she had also grown up understanding that doing everything right was not always the same as being protected. The system had promised her that preparation would matter, credentials would matter, documentation would matter, compliance would matter, but she had also grown up observing what happened when those promises collided with other more powerful dynamics that had nothing to do with legality or fairness. She was about to learn how wrong that promise was. "Keep counting, everyone," she said brightly, her voice still the same, still warm, still steady. "Can you see how the trees change color and density as we get closer to the preserve? That elevation shift means different plants can survive in different conditions. Different temperature, different moisture, different soil composition. You're going to see this with your own eyes today when we get there." The children turned their faces outward, their attention diverted, their anxiety prevented by the redirection of their focus. Diana's hands told a different story. They gripped the railing. Her knuckles whitened with pressure she was trying to control, but that was visible nonetheless. She checked the mirror. The patrol car was still there, still maintaining distance, still maintaining surveillance. She had done everything right. The bus was legal. The route was standard. The documentation was complete. She had not broken any law that she could identify, but her entire life experience told her that legality and fairness and rightness were not the primary factors that determined what would happen next. She would have to prove her innocence of whatever this officer decided to accuse her of. The siren activated at 1:53 p.m., precisely 114 miles into the drive at mile marker 47 on Route 9. It wasn't a full wail, the kind of aggressive sound that came with emergency vehicles heading toward life-threatening situations. Those were different. Those were the sounds that preceded tragedy. This was a series of short, sharp chirps, deliberate, measured, designed to command attention without suggesting actual emergency. The light bar began flashing red and blue, casting alternating colors across the highway landscape, turning the world inside the bus into something surreal. Diana's entire body understood what was happening. She had prepared for this, but preparation was different from experience. The two existed in different dimensions. Knowing that something might happen was not the same as experiencing it. She began signaling her deceleration smoothly, reducing speed, moving the bus toward the shoulder with the careful precision of someone who understood that any sudden movement could be interpreted as resistance, as defiance, as a reason to escalate. "Everyone stay seated and remain calm," she said to the children, her voice still steady, still composed, still performing the role of adult who had everything under control. "We're just going to pull over for a moment. A police officer probably needs to check something on the bus. It's routine. Everything is fine." It wasn't routine. Everything was not fine. But the children didn't need to know that yet. They needed to believe they were safe. That was Diana's responsibility. That was her job. Marcus Crawford, the bus driver, understood immediately what was happening. He had been driving professionally for 8 years without a single incident. His record was clean. His documentation was perfect. But he had also been a black man in America for 42 years, which meant he understood the pattern as well as Diana did. He understood that being clean and perfect and legal didn't always matter when an officer decided it didn't. He brought the bus to a complete stop at the shoulder. He placed it in park. He removed his hands from the steering wheel and placed them where they could be seen. He understood the protocols. He understood the language of compliance. He understood what happened if you made an officer feel threatened. Officer Derek Hansen exited his patrol car with aggressive efficiency. His movements were deliberate and designed to project dominance. He approached the driver's side window of the bus with his hand resting on his service weapon. Not drawn, not threatening in any illegal sense, but present, a reminder, a promise. He tapped on the window with the back of his knuckles, a gesture that was meant to be commanding. Marcus rolled it down with deliberate slowness. the window descending like a curtain that would reveal whatever came next. License and registration, not a request. A command delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been refused and who had no expectation of being refused. "Yes, officer." Marcus said this quietly, his voice carefully modulated to avoid any tone that could be interpreted as challenging or defiant. He reached for the glove compartment, moving deliberately so that nothing about his actions could be construed as sudden or threatening. Diana, watching from her position behind the driver's seat, could see the tension radiating off Marcus's shoulders. She could see his hands shaking slightly as he handed over the documents. She understood what he was thinking because she was thinking the same thing. What violation could have prompted this stop? She stood and moved forward slightly, her body tense, her mind running through scenarios. "Officer, I'm the field trip supervisor for this bus. The children are Riverside Elementary students on an official school field trip. The bus driver's documentation is, I'll ask the questions." Hansen said this flatly, not even turning his head in her direction. His entire demeanor communicated that her input was unwelcome, that her presence was an intrusion, that she would wait until she was spoken to. Diana stopped speaking. She understood the protocol. Interference would be interpreted as obstruction. Questions would be interpreted as defiance. Anything she said could and would be used against her in whatever narrative the officer decided to construct. Hansen examined Marcus's license for an extended moment. He examined the vehicle registration. He examined the insurance documentation. All of it was current. All of it was legal. All of it was correct. He knew this. He had run the bus's information through dispatch before pulling them over. He had already confirmed the legality of every document. But he examined each one as though it contained evidence of crime, as though he was searching for some hidden flaw. "Step out of the vehicle." He ordered this to Marcus, not to Diana. "Officer, there are children on this." Diana began, her protective instinct overriding her better judgment. "Not you." Hansen interrupted, turning slightly so she could see the dismissal in his face. "Him." Marcus stepped out of the bus with careful movements, each gesture controlled, each motion deliberate. Hansen guided him to the back of the vehicle out of direct line of sight from the children and began a pat-down search. Marcus stood with his hands up, complying completely, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Diana could see the outline of this interaction from her position on the bus. She could see Marcus's face as Hansen's hands moved across his body, searching for something. Weapons, drugs, an excuse, something that didn't exist. After 5 minutes that felt like 30, Hansen returned Marcus to the driver's side window. Marcus's face was pale. His confidence had been shaken. His dignity had been stripped. He had done nothing wrong and had been treated as though he had. Hansen leaned toward the window. "Your bus is too large for this route without a special permit." He announced this, his voice carrying the certainty of someone stating fact rather than making an assertion. Diana felt her stomach drop. The bus was not too large for this route. This was a standard school bus on a state highway. Hundreds of school buses used this exact route annually. It was literally on the approved route list from the Department of Transportation. There was no special permit required. She knew this with absolute certainty because she had reviewed the regulations specifically before requesting approval for this trip. But Hansen had just stated it with authority. He had said it as fact. And Diana understood something fundamental. When a police officer said something was true, they had the power to make it true, regardless of whether it actually was. "Officer," she said carefully, moving forward slightly, trying to sound cooperative rather than challenging. "This is a standard route. The bus is approved for this corridor. There's no permit required for, is there a problem?" Hansen interrupted, turning his attention to Diana for the first time since he had pulled them over. His eyes were cold, not angry. Cold. Something in his eyes told her that she had just made a critical mistake. She had questioned his authority. She had challenged his narrative. She had done the thing that police officers like Derek Hansen hated more than anything. She had suggested, however gently, however respectfully, that he might be wrong. "No, officer," she said, pulling back slightly, trying to recalibrate, trying to recover from the mistake. "I'm just trying to clarify the situation so I can explain it to step out of the bus," Hansen commanded. Diana's heart began to race. She had prepared for this moment. She had practiced it in her mind. She had rehearsed the protocol. But experiencing it was different from imagining it. The moment stretched. Every second felt like an hour. Every breath felt calculated. Every movement felt fraught with danger. "I'm the field trip supervisor," she said quietly, her voice still trying to project cooperation. "The children need an adult present. If there's an issue with the bus, I can address it from here." "Step out of the bus." Each word was a separate command, separated by intentional pauses, designed to communicate absolute authority. Diana looked back at the children. 24 faces watching her, understanding something was wrong. Marcus's face pressed against the window. Aisha's eyes tracking the situation with the intensity of someone who sensed something important was happening. Jerome's expression confused but increasingly afraid. They were old enough to understand that something was wrong. They were too young to understand what. She stood and moved toward the door. She could feel the weight of their attention on her back. Ms. Foster Marcus's voice was small, afraid. "It's okay, sweetheart," Diana said, using the voice she had developed over 15 years of teaching. The voice that made children feel safe, even when she was terrified. "Everyone stay seated. I'll be right back." She stepped down from the bus. The moment her feet touched the pavement, Officer Derek Hansen stepped directly into her personal space. He was using his size deliberately, his body language deliberately chosen to make her feel small, to establish a hierarchy that didn't actually exist but that he was creating through physical intimidation. Diana understood the tactic because she had studied it. This was intimidation. This was a power display. This was not about the bus. This was not about any violation. This was about establishing dominance. "You see what I don't understand," Hansen said slowly, his voice low, his words deliberate and designed to be demeaning. "You people always think you can talk your way out of situations. Always think because you have a job, because you have a degree, because you have these kids." He gestured dismissively at the bus. "That you're untouchable." Diana's hands started to shake, not from fear of immediate violence. She was trained against that. She knew the protocols for managing fear. But from the understood threat beneath his words. The historical knowledge that black women in America had limited options in situations like this. The awareness that she was outnumbered and outweaponed and operating under rules that this officer could change at any moment. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said carefully. Her voice controlled despite the shaking in her hands. "The bus is legal, the route is legal, the permit status isn't applicable. You need to understand something." Hansen continued stepping even closer, invading the space until she could feel him breathing. Until there was nowhere to retreat. "The uniform makes me authority here. Not your degree. Not your job. Not your 38 years of being careful. Me. So when I tell you that your bus is in violation, your bus is in violation. When I tell you that you're interfering with my investigation, you're interfering. And when I ask you to do something, you do it." Understood. Diana's entire body understood. But she understood something else too. If she pushed back, if she argued, if she asserted any rights at all, he would escalate. The trajectory was clear. Resistance meant consequences she didn't want to contemplate. "Yes, officer." She said this. She saw something shift in his expression. Satisfaction. He had established dominance. He had made her acknowledge his power. He had remade her from equal adult to subordinate, and she had accepted that remapping for her own safety and for the safety of the children watching from the bus. "Step to the back of the bus," he commanded. "Now." Diana complied. She moved to the rear of the vehicle, her movements deliberate, her mind calculating the next steps, her body operating on survival instinct. Inside the bus, the children began to understand that something was very wrong. Officer Derek Hansen called for a second unit. While he waited for it to arrive, maintaining his position near Diana, asking questions about the route. In a voice that was designed to keep her off balance, Diana stood in the April afternoon heat and felt her entire sense of safety disintegrating. Why was she being questioned? What was the violation? When would this end? When the second patrol car arrived, it was driven by Officer Melissa Torres, a 24-year-old rookie who had been on the force for only 11 months. She was still in the phase where she believed law enforcement was about helping people. She had not yet learned the unwritten protocols of protecting colleagues or rationalizing force. She was fresh, earnest, and visibly uncomfortable with what she was witnessing. Hansen gave her an order: go onto the bus and ensure the children remain calm. What Torres understood immediately was that her presence, a second police presence, meant something was officially wrong. She was there not to help children but to control them. She was there to prevent them from advocating for their teacher. She was there to manage a situation that had already crossed into inappropriate. When Torres boarded the bus, the children's fear amplified. They had thought maybe Ms. Foster was just answering questions. Now they understood. Something was seriously, undeniably wrong. Marcus pressed his face against the window, trying to see what was happening to his teacher, his eyes searching for her. Aisha, who had been taught by her mother to document things that seemed important, quietly removed the phone from her backpack. Her hands were shaking, but she was already recording. Jerome began to cry. The full body-racking sobs of a child whose anchor had just been removed. Amara held his hand but had no comfort to offer. Officer Torres tried to comfort them, but her presence did the opposite. She sat in the front of the bus and spoke in a voice that was trying to be calm but that everyone could hear was performing calmness. It didn't actually feel. "Ms. Foster is just being questioned about the route," Torres said, her voice cracking slightly on the word route. "She'll be fine. Everything is going to be fine." But her voice cracked on that last word, and everyone on the bus heard the lie in it. Everyone understood that Officer Torres didn't actually believe what she was saying. Outside the bus, Hansen announced a new violation. "The bus is overloaded." Marcus Crawford, still standing beside his vehicle, provided the capacity documentation. The bus was rated for 60 passengers. There were 31 people total, 24 children, 2 adults, including Diana and the driver. The mathematics were correct. The bus was not overloaded. The documentation clearly stated this. "I'm saying it's overloaded," Hansen replied, his voice carrying a finality that suggested logic and documentation were irrelevant. "The bus needs to be evacuated and inspected." Marcus called the school called the district called a lawyer. But in the meantime, the protocol was being enforced. 24 children were told they needed to exit the bus. They were told they needed to stand in a line on the shoulder of the highway, in their field trip clothes, without their teacher, without the person they trusted absolutely. The children filed out slowly, each one moving with the reluctance of someone leaving safety. Marcus was crying. Aisha kept her phone recording from her pocket, continuing to document the experience. Jerome held Amara's hand for comfort, seeking to give what he no longer had. They lined up on the highway shoulder like evidence at a crime scene, like people who had done something wrong, like children who were being punished for the crime of being in the presence of a black woman who had asked a question. Inside the patrol car, Diana Foster was in shock, not psychological shock. Her mind was still functioning, still calculating, still trying to understand what was happening, but the kind of shock where the mind cannot quite process information that contradicts its understanding of how the world is supposed to work. She had a master's degree. She had a clean record. She was transporting children under official school authorization with complete documentation. And she was being arrested for obstruction, for asking questions, for being black. Though she couldn't say that out loud because in the moment of her arrest, she needed to believe the system was rational. She needed to believe there was a reason. She needed to believe that compliance and documentation and credentials mattered. She was wrong. What Officer Derek Hansen did not understand was that he was being filmed. Aisha's phone, a recent birthday gift from her mother with specific instructions to record important things, because her mother was a civil rights attorney and understood the power of documentation, had captured 42 seconds of video. The footage showed Officer Hansen separating Diana from the bus. It showed her being placed in handcuffs. It showed her being guided to the patrol car with his hand on her head. A gesture that was unnecessary, theatrical, designed purely to communicate dominance. The audio was imperfect, captured through the bus window and the background noise of traffic. But the image was crystal clear. A black woman being removed from a school bus full of children for the crime of asking a clarifying question. Marcus Crawford, standing on the side of the highway watching his colleague be arrested, had also recorded the confrontation on his personal phone. He had filmed from inside the bus, angled so that the window provided a frame around Diana and Hansen. The audio was better from his angle. The threat in Hansen's voice was unmistakable. The injustice was visible. Marcus understood the gravity of what had happened. He understood that this footage was evidence of something important. He understood that staying silent was complicity. He understood that what happened next mattered. He called the school immediately after Diana's arrest. He connected with Principal James Henderson at Riverside Elementary. He was shaking. He could barely form sentences. "We need to put this on social media," Marcus said into the phone, his voice still shaking, his hands still trembling. "Now. People need to see what just happened. She didn't do anything wrong. She asked what the violation was, and they arrested her." Principal Henderson made the decision without hesitation. In a world where injustice could only be fought with visibility, visibility was the tool they had. At 2:47 p.m., Thursday, April 18th, Marcus Crawford posted a 14-second video to Facebook with a caption that would change everything. "This is Ms. Diana Foster, a teacher at Riverside Elementary. She was arrested on a field trip for asking the officer what the violation was. 24 children watched this happen. There was no traffic violation, no obstruction, no crime, just a teacher being arrested for being black." At 3:04 p.m., the post had 200 shares. By 3:45 p.m., the principal had shared it with the school district's 8,000-person parent network. By 4:15 p.m., it had 50,000 shares. By 5:30 p.m., the teachers' union had shared it to 45,000 members statewide. By 6:30 p.m., it had 2 million shares. The story was no longer about a traffic stop. The story had become about something deeper. It had become a story about the safety of educators, about the trauma of children witnessing authority abuse, about the violation of trust placed in teachers, about the use of power to dominate rather than protect, about the racial dimensions of policing in America and the ways it disproportionately affected teachers of color. These themes resonated across demographics and political divides in a way that pure criminal justice statistics never could. Parents looked at that video and saw their own children's teachers. They looked at the faces of those 24 students pressed against the bus window and saw vulnerability. They looked at Diana Foster in handcuffs and saw injustice they could not ignore. By 7:45 p.m. Thursday evening, "Protect Our Teachers" was trending nationally on Twitter. By 8:30 p.m., major news outlets were running the story. By 11 p.m., the video had been viewed 4.3 million times. By Friday morning, every major news organization in the United States was covering it. Cable news was running the footage on loop. Morning shows were dedicating segments to it. Radio stations were discussing it. Online publications were publishing think pieces about what it meant. The story had grown beyond anyone's control. Diana Foster sat in a holding cell at Riverside County Police Station trying to make sense of what had happened. 2:45 p.m. Thursday. She was arrested. 3:15 p.m. Thursday. She was fingerprinted, photographed, processed as a criminal in the system that was supposed to protect her. 4 p.m. Thursday. She was placed in a cell with no explanation, no clarity about what would happen next. 5 p.m. Thursday. She was offered one phone call. She called the district. The superintendent called a lawyer. The lawyer called the jail. But the machinery of the system was indifferent to her circumstances. She was booked. She was detained. She was accused. By 6 p.m. Thursday, the lawyer called back. "You're being charged with obstruction of a lawful police investigation and disorderly conduct," the voice on the phone said, with the calm of someone who had delivered this information many times. "There's also a potential charge of resisting arrest. I didn't obstruct anything," Diana said, her voice still steady but hollow now. "I asked a question. I asked what the violation was." "Doesn't matter what actually happened," the lawyer said gently, with the kind of sadness that came from having explained this concept too many times. "He says you did. It's your word against his. He has the authority. You don't. The police union protects officers in these situations. You'll need to prepare for this being a process." Diana's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She thought about the children. What had they been told about where she was? Had the school called their parents? Were they traumatized? Were they processing the image of their teacher being arrested, being removed from their care, being taken away? She thought about Marcus and Aisha recording. Had it helped? Would anyone care? Or would this just be one more story that faded away while the system continued unchanged? She thought about her brother Michael, dead in 2009 because he had reached suddenly, and officers had interpreted the movement as threat. Dead because staying calm during a police encounter was not the same as being safe. Dead because the system did not protect people like them. She had spent 15 years teaching because she couldn't trust the system. But she had devoted her life to giving children what she never had: safe adults who would protect them absolutely. She had thought that by being excellent, by being prepared, by being compliant, she could shield them from the reality she had experienced. But they had watched her get arrested anyway. Her entire strategy for survival had failed in front of the people she was supposed to protect. Chief Robert Harrison of the Riverside County Police Department watched the viral video for the first time on the news broadcast on Friday morning at 8 a.m. His administrative assistant had flagged it and sent him a note. "This is a problem." He watched Diana Foster ask a question. He watched Officer Derek Hansen order her from the bus. He watched her be handcuffed in front of children. He watched the bus pull away with her inside. His stomach dropped. He had been in law enforcement for 32 years. He understood liability. He understood public relations. He understood that his officer had just handed the city's legal department the most expensive mistake of the decade. By 10 a.m., his legal team had already begun calculating exposure. By 11 a.m., they had issued preliminary settlement estimates. By noon, the city council had been briefed. By 1 p.m. Friday, the prosecutor's office was reviewing the charges. Maria Delgado, the district attorney, sat in her office with the case file open. She read the police report. She watched the video. She read it again. She watched the video again. The charges against Diana Foster were obstruction of a lawful police investigation, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. All three charges were fabricated. There was no lawful investigation. The bus had committed no violation. Diana had not obstructed anything. She had asked clarifying questions. The disorderly conduct allegation was based on her speaking in a raised tone. Her recorded voice showed no raised tone. She had been calm and respectful throughout. The resisting arrest charge was based on the allegation that she had tensed her body when handcuffed. She had not resisted. She had complied immediately and completely. Maria Delgado made the decision by 3 p.m. Friday. The charges would be dropped immediately and a public statement of apology would be issued by her office. But by then the story had already metastasized beyond the control of any single official. By Saturday morning, the pattern was impossible to deny. Officer Derek Hansen had accumulated 14 excessive force complaints in 12 years of service. 9 of those complaints involved black citizens. 11 involved women. All had been dismissed or settled quietly. The first complaint was filed in 2012. A woman reported that Hansen had thrown her to the ground during a traffic stop for a broken taillight. The complaint was dismissed without investigation. The second complaint was filed in 2013. A man reported that Hansen had used excessive force during a vehicle search. The complaint was settled quietly for $47,000 with a non-disclosure agreement. The third complaint was filed in 2014. An elderly woman reported that Hansen had broken her wrist during an arrest. She settled her lawsuit for $180,000. Hansen kept his job. By 2019, the complaints had multiplied. By 2021, his file was a testament to unchecked aggression. By 2023, there was no ambiguity about the pattern. Derek Hansen was an officer who used force disproportionately, who targeted black citizens disproportionately, and who faced no consequences for either. The union had protected him every time. The department had protected him every time. The structure had protected him every time. But this time, something was different. This time, it was on video. This time, it involved children. This time, it went viral before any official could suppress it. On Saturday afternoon, additional victims began coming forward emboldened by the visibility of Diana's case. Woman 1. I was stopped for suspicious tinting. I looked up the tint regulations. My tint was legal. Officer Hansen wrote the citation anyway. I had to hire a lawyer to fight it. The charges were dropped, but I had to spend $1,200 on legal fees. Woman 2, I was charged with improper lane change. I have dash cam footage of my lane change. It was proper, legal. Officer Hansen cited me anyway. I had to take a day off work to fight the charge in traffic court. Woman 3. I was stopped for probable cause marijuana. Officer said he smelled it. He didn't test me. He didn't find anything. But my car was seized anyway. I didn't get it back for 6 months. By then, my insurance had been canceled. My job situation had become untenable. Woman 4. I asked why I was stopped. He said I was being disorderly. I was calm. I was polite. But asking questions was somehow disorderly. Woman 5. He told me I fit the profile for vehicle theft. My car was a 10-year-old Honda Civic. The profile he described was someone driving. Each story was distinct. Each story was devastating. Each story corroborated the same narrative. Derek Hansen was not a good officer having a bad day. Derek Hansen was a predator with a badge and institutional protection. By Sunday morning, the story had expanded yet again. Investigative journalists had connected the dots that no one at the department had apparently noticed or cared about. There were patterns within patterns. Hansen's stops were concentrated in specific neighborhoods: Midlothian Corridor, South Side, East End. Neighborhoods with high black populations. Neighborhoods with high vehicle seizure numbers. The journalists began asking, why were vehicles being seized at such high rates? The answer led to Metro Towing, a private company that held the city's towing contract. The journalists began asking, why did Metro Towing need so many vehicles? The answer led to a meeting memo discovered in the department's filing system, a memo dated March 2023, a memo about enforcement metrics and tow contract justification. The memo stated Metro Towing needs 45 vehicles per month to justify their city contract. Current numbers are at 28. We need to improve. The memo recommended focus enforcement on Midlothian, Corridor, Southside, and East End neighborhoods. High vehicle value, low legal pushback from residents. The memo established quotas, minimum 6 stops per week, minimum 2 vehicle seizures per month. The memo named specific officers as responsible for meeting these quotas. Officer Derek Hansen's name was on that list. The journalists began requesting text messages between officers. They obtained them through FOIA requests. The texts painted a picture of coordination and awareness. Hansen to junior officer Kyle Martinez Lang wants 12 stops this week. Midlothian is easy pickings. Martinez's response, soccer moms don't lawyer up Hansen. That's the idea. Another text Hansen to unknown number. She complained, don't worry, Union will handle it. Another text dated 1 week after Diana's arrest. New chief is a problem. Asking too many questions. Lang says, keep our heads down. The story was no longer about one bad officer. The story was now about institutional corruption. The story was now about targeted enforcement. The story was now about money flowing in ways that benefited officers and connected businesses while harming vulnerable citizens. Investigative journalists obtained financial records. Metro Towing had paid the city $680,000 over 3 years in contract revenue. Where did the money go? Some of it went to city operations, but some of it had a more specific trajectory. Hansen received $52,000 in consulting fees from Craig Thompson, the owner of Metro Towing. Captain Victor Lang Hansen's commanding officer and the author of the quota memo received nothing directly. But his brother owned a storage lot that was used by Metro Towing for vehicle storage. His brother was paid $120,000 over 3 years in rent by Metro Towing. The money flowed like this. Officers made stops. Tow companies seized vehicles. Towing company paid city. Money flowed back through family connections. Everyone profited except the women who had been stopped for no reason. By Monday morning, this entire corrupt structure was public. It was on every news network. It was trending on social media. It was indefensible. Saturday morning at 10:15 a.m., Diana Foster walked out of the Riverside County Detention Center into a crowd of supporters, activists, teachers, and media that had assembled in the parking lot overnight. She had been held for nearly 24 hours. She was still wearing the same clothes she had been arrested in. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had not slept, who had spent a night in a cell trying to understand how this had happened, what she had done wrong, whether she would face trial. The cameras rushed toward her. The reporters shouted questions. But Diana didn't respond to journalists. Instead, she asked for a microphone. Someone gave her one. Her voice when she spoke was different, not diminished. She was still strong, but changed, marked by what she had experienced. I want to address the children, she said, her words deliberate. To Marcus, Aisha, to all the students on that bus on Thursday. I'm sorry you had to experience that. I'm sorry that you saw what happened. I want you to know that what you saw was wrong. It was unjust. And I want you to know that injustice is something we don't have to accept. She paused, looking directly into the cameras, looking at the children who would see this video. And I want to address every teacher here, every parent here, every person who cares about children. We have to do better. Our children deserve better. Our educators deserve better. Our communities deserve better." She handed back the microphone. The crowd erupted. Chants began. "Hands up for teachers. Protect our educators. Justice for Ms. Foster." By afternoon, a petition to fire Officer Derek Hansen had collected 340,000 signatures. By evening, the teachers' union announced a nationwide Safe Schools Day to be observed the following week. By the next morning, Democratic lawmakers announced they were drafting police accountability legislation. By that afternoon, documentary producers, book publishers, and speaking agencies had reached out with offers. Diana declined all of them. She had one focus: returning to her classroom on Monday morning. Chief Robert Harrison made the decision by Sunday evening. Officer Derek Hansen had to be fired. The internal affairs investigation, which normally took weeks or months, was completed in 4 days. The findings were unambiguous. Hansen had initiated a stop based on discriminatory profiling. He had fabricated violations. He had separated a teacher from children under her supervision. He had filed false reports. The path forward was clear. Monday morning at 9 a.m. a press conference was called at City Hall. The room filled with media. The mayor was present. The chief was present. The prosecutor was present. The city council president was present. Chief Robert Harrison approached the podium. Effective immediately, he began, "Officer Derek Hansen is terminated from employment with the Riverside County Police Department. His actions violated every standard we hold ourselves to." Specifically, on April 18, 2024, Officer Hansen initiated a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion. He demanded searches without probable cause. He used physical contact without justification. He filed false reports about the incident, and he traumatized 24 children in the process. He paused. This is not an isolated incident. This is a 6-year pattern of misconduct that was known to this department and inadequately addressed. Officer Hansen is terminated, but this case has revealed that there are structural issues within our department that require immediate attention. The mayor spoke next, announcing that the city was committing to comprehensive police reform. The prosecutor spoke, announcing that federal charges against Officer Hansen were being pursued. By noon, the Department of Justice announced that it was opening a formal civil rights investigation into Riverside County Police. By afternoon, Metro Towing lost its city contract. By end of day, Officer Derek Hansen was served with federal civil rights violation charges and was advised to retain an attorney. By the next morning, Captain Victor Lang announced his resignation as union president, and his attorney indicated he would be cooperating with investigators. By Wednesday, 3 other officers were suspended pending investigation. By Friday, 2 of those officers resigned rather than face investigation. The structure, which had seemed immovable, began to crack. Monday, April 29th, 1 week after Diana's arrest, the Riverside City Council chambers were packed. 53 people present. 6 cameras positioned around the room. All 9 council members seated at the raised dais. This was not a trial. This was something more significant. It was a public reckoning with the cost of unchecked power. The first speaker was Chief Robert Harrison, who presented the facts of the case with clinical precision. He showed body camera footage. He showed civilian video. He read witness statements. He presented the data. Hansen's complaint history, his stop patterns, his fabricated charges. On the day of the incident, Harrison said his voice even and professional Officer Hansen conducted a stop without reasonable suspicion. He demanded a search without probable cause. He used physical contact without justification. He called backup under false pretenses. All documented on body camera and civilian recordings and my witness testimony. He paused. This is not isolated. This is a 6-year pattern. 11 complaints, 63 stops, 89% of them involving Black or Latino women. Detective Sarah Wright then presented financial evidence. She showed the memo about quotas. She showed the texts between officers. She showed the financial trail from Metro Towing to Hansen to Lang's brother. The structure wasn't broken by one bad officer, Wright said, her voice clear. The structure was designed to function this way. Officers were given quotas. They were incentivized to make stops in specific neighborhoods, and those officers who met the quotas were rewarded financially. This wasn't a mistake. This was how things were designed to work. The chamber went silent. Then came the victims. The first speaker was Renee Caldwell. She was an accountant. She was organized. She was articulate. And she was the wife of the police chief, a fact that made her testimony politically radioactive because it suggested this corruption had happened despite oversight. Not because oversight failed to exist. "I work with data," she said, her voice steady. "Data is my profession. And the data in this case is clear. I was stopped for my skin color. But data doesn't show my daughter's nightmares. Data doesn't show the way she now flinches when we see a police car. Data doesn't measure the years of therapy she'll need to process what she witnessed." She looked directly at the council members. 11 women complained before me. The system said not our problem. I'm number 12. The difference between me and the other 11 women. My husband has institutional power. That's not justice. That's luck. And luck shouldn't determine whether a mother gets to drive her daughter safely down the road. Luck shouldn't determine whether a teacher can do her job. If you're going to fire Officer Hansen, that's good. But if you don't change the structure that protected him for 6 years, I'll be back in 2 years with 23 other women. Applause erupted. Next came the other victims. "I teach respect for authority," one woman said. "I teach my students that police are there to help." "How do I teach that when authority didn't respect me? I missed my son's birthday." Another said, "I was stopped on a pretense. My car was seized. I had to fight in court for months to get it back. During that time, I lost my job because I couldn't get to work. I missed my son's birthday because Officer Hansen needed to meet a quota." "I have a master's degree," another woman said. "During my stop, I was asked to recite the alphabet backwards to determine if I was intoxicated. I had not been speeding. I had not been erratic. But Officer Hansen wanted to humiliate me, and I let him because I was terrified." Each testimony was distinct, each one unique. But collectively, they painted a picture of patterns of abuse. When it came time for Officer Hansen to respond, his attorney read a prepared statement. Hansen himself was absent, represented by counsel. "Officer Hansen regrets any perception of impropriety," the attorney said. "He has served this community for 15 years. He requests the council consider his full record." Council member Lisa Taylor interrupted. "His full record includes 11 complaints, $52,000 in kickbacks from a towing company, text messages calling minority women easy pickings. What exactly should we consider?" No response came from the attorney. Council member David Miller attempted to defend Hansen. "We can't destroy a career over one incident." "We have to be careful about 11 incidents." Taylor corrected. 63 stops, 23 victims. When does a pattern become a policy? Miller went silent. The votes came. Terminate Officer Hansen's employment 7-2. Miller and one other dissented. Suspend officers. Martinez Foster and Williams 9-0. Unanimous. Adopt comprehensive police reform policies 8-1. Miller only voted no. The gavel fell. The decision was rendered. Officer Derek Hansen's career was over. Officer Derek Hansen watched the city council vote on television in his apartment. 14 years of service. 12 years of complaints. 14 civil rights violations. 14 times the structure had protected him. Now, there was no one protecting him. His attorney called immediately after the vote was announced. "They're proceeding with federal charges. We should discuss your options. "The union will fight this, Hansen," said, his voice still operating under the assumption of protection that had carried him through 15 years. "The union issued a statement distancing themselves from you an hour ago," the attorney replied. "They're not fighting this." The phone call lasted 7 minutes. By the time it ended, Hansen understood the structure had decided he was expendable. The union, which had protected him countless times, had decided that protecting him further was too costly. The department which had covered for him had decided that transparency was the only path forward. He was alone. By Tuesday, federal charges were filed, 4 counts of civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, 2 counts of filing false reports, 1 count of conspiracy. By Wednesday, the civil lawsuit filed by Diana Foster and the families of the students was served. The initial settlement demand was $1.2 million. By Thursday, his union membership became a liability instead of a protection. Other officers went silent. They didn't call. They didn't offer support. They distanced themselves from him the way he had distanced himself from victims, completely and permanently. By Friday, he had no job, no support, and federal criminal charges pending. For the first time in his life, there was no shield protecting him from consequences. Tuesday morning, April 30th. Diana Foster stood outside her classroom at Riverside Elementary School at 7:45 a.m. She had been released Saturday. She had spent Sunday and Monday recovering, processing, rebuilding herself. But she understood something fundamental. Staying away longer would mean the structure had truly won. Staying away would mean she had been broken by what happened. She refused to be broken. She unlocked her classroom door and walked inside. 32 people were waiting for her. Teachers, staff, custodians, secretaries, the principal, the superintendent, parents, and most importantly, the students who had been on that bus: Marcus, Aisha, Jerome, Amara, and 20 others. The principal had organized it overnight, understanding that Diana needed to know she was not alone. Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. "Good morning," she said to the children. "Good morning, Miss Foster." They chorused, their voices full of something that had changed since Thursday. Not just relief that she was back, but understanding. They had witnessed injustice. They had seen an adult stand up. They had seen a community respond. They had learned in the way that only children can learn that standing up for what was right mattered. Diana knelt down and gathered as many of them as she could into an embrace. "We're okay," she said. "We're all okay." She still wasn't sure she believed it, but she said it anyway, performing the role of adult who had everything under control. The superintendent made a statement to the assembled media outside the classroom. "Miss Diana Foster is back in her classroom where she belongs. Her students needed her. This community needed her. And the structure finally recognized what was obvious all along. She is a dedicated educator and a vital part of our community." Photographers captured the image. A black woman surrounded by children. Surrounded by a community that had stood up for her. That image would become the iconic photo of the entire case. It would be shared millions of times. It would become the visual representation of what solidarity looked like. By noon that day, the photo had been shared 3 million times. By evening, teachers' unions in 47 states had announced that they were adopting similar accountability measures. By the next day, 6 states launched investigations into their own police departments for similar quota mechanisms and targeting patterns. The city of Riverside offered Diana Foster a settlement of $600,000. Diana rejected it. "I don't want money," she told her attorney. "I want change." She negotiated a new settlement, $600,000 divided into 2 parts. $100,000 went directly to Diana for her personal use and recovery. $500,000 was designated for reform initiatives and victim compensation. The reform initiatives included body cameras mandated for all traffic stops, footage released within 72 hours, not 180 days, a civilian review board established with subpoena power. Any officer with 3 or more complaints in a 5-year period must undergo mandatory retraining or reassignment. The quota structure permanently banned in all departments. De-escalation training mandatory for all officers. Annual bias training required for all personnel. No future contracts with towing companies that employed officers' relatives. Diana took her personal $100,000 and donated it to the creation of what she called the Riverside Elementary Fund, a fund dedicated to trauma therapy for children who had witnessed police violence. The $500,000 in settlement money would provide matching funds for 4 years. In the first month, the fund served 47 children. By the end of the first year, it had expanded statewide and was serving 3,200 children. By the end of the second year, it had become a national program serving 28,000 children. The Department of Justice federal investigation concluded 16 weeks after Diana's arrest. The report was thorough and damning. It confirmed targeting of Black and Latina women, confirmed quota structure incentivized false stops and vehicle seizures, confirmed union protection enabled misconduct to continue unchecked. The report recommended federal oversight of the department for 3 years. It recommended a full audit of all stops made by Officer Hansen during his 12-year tenure. The audit examined 847 traffic stops. 612 or 72% involved Black and Latina drivers. 780 or 92% were determined to have no legal justification. 248 vehicles had been illegally seized. No owner of those vehicles had been compensated or even formally apologized to, until now. The city initiated a lawsuit against Metro Towing to recover the vehicles or provide compensation to their owners. The company, already losing its city contract and facing federal charges for the kickback structure, agreed to settle for $1.3 million. Officer Derek Hansen's plea deal: 3 years in federal prison. Lifetime ban from law enforcement. Requirement to register as having violated citizens' federal civil rights. Captain Victor Lang's plea deal: 5 years in federal prison. Conspiracy conviction. Forfeiture of pension benefits. Metro Towing owner Craig Thompson's plea deal: 4 years in federal prison. $1.2 million in restitution. Permanent ban from holding city contracts. The message was clear and undeniable. Institutional corruption carried institutional consequences. Within weeks of Diana's return to teaching, she began receiving emails and phone calls from teachers across the country. I had an encounter like this. My colleague was stopped during a field trip. I was pulled over while driving students. This happened to me, but no one cared. 2,847 stories were submitted within 6 months. 3,000 of them involved teachers of color. 2,100 of them involved children witnessing police encounters. Diana created a website, teachersforjustice.org. The website served a simple function: document every teacher police encounter, track which officers had multiple complaints, track which departments weren't reforming, track which cities were doing the work and which weren't. The public could see it. Teachers could see it. Parents could see it. The website became an accountability tool. It became a way for teachers to protect each other. It became a way for parents to know which officers were safe to be around their children. By the end of the first year, 13 million website visits. By the end of the second year, teachers in 47 states had begun organizing around teacher protection and police accountability. The movement that had started with one viral video had become a national conversation about how we protect the people who protect our children. October morning, same Route 9, different officer. A Black woman driving her 2 children was pulled over for suspicious tinting. The officer approached her window with professionalism. "Good morning, ma'am. I pulled you over because I noticed your window tinting appears darker than state regulations allow. May I see your license and registration?" The driver, nervous but not terrified, provided the documents. The officer checked them carefully, reviewed the tinting regulations on his phone, and made a determination. "Actually, your tint is within legal limits. I apologize for the stop. You were operating legally. You're free to go." A body camera captured the entire interaction. The footage was uploaded to the public system that evening. The driver reviewed it the next morning and saw that her rights had been respected, that courtesy had been extended, that she had not been harmed. This was the new structure. Officer Derek Hansen's behavior was no longer invisible. It was studied. It was taught. It was held up as an example of what unchecked authority looked like. New officers at the academy watched videos of his stops. They saw the pattern of targeting. They saw the pattern of false charges. They saw the consequences of unchecked power. Some of them recognized themselves in those videos. They realized they had been developing similar patterns. They requested additional training. They changed their entire approach to policing. Travis was one of them, a 24-year-old new officer who watched footage of his first traffic stops and realized he was becoming Derek Hansen. He saw his own aggression in Hansen's behavior. He saw his own assumptions playing out in traffic stops that seemed perfectly justified to him at the time, but looked different on video. He requested transfer to a community policing unit. He committed himself to being different. New school year, new students, new class of third graders. Diana taught them the same way she had always taught them, with care, with intention, with full protection. But she also added something new to the curriculum, a unit called Understanding Law Enforcement and Civil Rights. She taught them authority has responsibility. She taught them you have rights even when adults have power. She taught them speaking up is not the same as disrespect. She taught them documenting truth is important. She taught them communities can change if people are willing to stand up and ask for change. When a student named Jerome asked Ms. Foster, "Are police safe?" she answered honestly. "Some police work very hard to be safe and fair. Some don't. We need to keep watching and asking them to do better, not in a way that makes us angry or unsafe, but in a way that holds them accountable." She didn't lie and pretend everything was fixed. She didn't make the children cynical or afraid. She taught them to be vigilant. At the end of the school year, her former students returned to visit her. Marcus, Aisha, Jerome. Now fourth graders, they had become small activists in their own ways. Marcus had written a letter to the school board about police accountability. Aisha had created a presentation about her experience witnessing Diana's arrest. Jerome had started a club dedicated to documenting community stories. They had learned something profound from watching their teacher stand up for herself. That standing up mattered. 2 years after Diana's arrest, the national statistics on police accountability shifted measurably. States with mandatory de-escalation training saw a 23% decrease in use of force incidents. Cities with civilian review boards saw a 31% increase in complaint sustain rates. Officer discipline, which had averaged 2% of complaints being sustained, increased to 18%. The case of Officer Derek Hansen became a cited precedent in legal arguments about police accountability and civil rights. Law schools taught it. Police academies taught it. Legal teams used it as a template for pursuing similar cases. Diana's story reached beyond one city, one state, one moment. It became proof that change was possible. It became proof that one person standing up could transform a structure. It became proof that children witnessing justice matter. The 24 students who had been on that bus grew up understanding something fundamental. Adults who care will stand up for you. The structure can change if people refuse to accept injustice. One moment of courage can echo across years and influence millions. 3 years after the arrest, Riverside Elementary School held a dedication ceremony. A statue was unveiled on the campus grounds. It was a sculpture of a teacher and a child holding hands. Not a representation of Diana specifically, but of what the moment represented. Adult protection, child safety, community solidarity. The inscription read, "When we stand together, we are protected." Diana was invited to speak at the ceremony. She declined to make it about herself. Instead, she invited Marcus, Aisha, Jerome, the students from that field trip, to speak. Marcus: "I learned that adults make mistakes, and we have to be willing to see it and hold them accountable." Aisha: "I learned that recording truth matters because truth can help people understand what happened." Jerome: "I learned that teachers are brave when we need them to be, and we need to protect them the way they protect us." Then Diana addressed the crowd of 200. Parents, educators, community leaders, city officials, teachers from across the state who had come to witness this moment. 3 years ago, she said, her voice clear and steady, "I was arrested in front of 24 children. That arrest wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I had done everything right and the structure still failed me. Today, because people refused to look away, because teachers and parents and students spoke up, because a community demanded change, the structure is better. Not perfect. Better. That's what justice looks like. It's not celebration. It's the quiet work of making sure the next teacher doesn't have to experience what I did. The next children don't have to watch. The next officer doesn't have to make the choice that Derek Hansen made." She paused, letting her words settle. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Because accountability is permanent. Change requires constant attention. Every single person here has responsibility to watch, to speak, to hold the institutions accountable. That's what it means, to stand together. And that's what we did. We stood together. And we changed something. The camera panned across the gathered crowd. Teachers, parents, children, community members, police officers who had trained in the new structure. All of them standing together. The work continued. The accountability continued. The commitment to protecting teachers and students continued. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to our channel. Because patterns only change when people refuse to look away. Your voice matters. Your refusal to accept injustice matters. The road is still there. The police still patrol. But now so do the cameras and the people behind them.